The thunder cracked, a jagged split in the sky, and Faith Garrett stood frozen in the center of her family's ranch house. She wasn't just looking at a room. She was staring at the wreckage of her life. The telegram in her hand was a flimsy piece of paper, but it felt as heavy as a tombstone. It trembled, just like her heart. The words were simple, brutal, and they kept hammering themselves into her mind. Elijah Warren, her fiancé, the man she was supposed to marry in 3 days, had married her sister Vivian. Her fist clenched around the paper, knuckles turning a bloodless white. The rage was a hot, searing thing, burning away the shock, leaving only ash. This was Nebraska, 1875. A woman's future was a fragile thing, and hers had just been shattered into a million pieces. For 2 years she'd planned. 2 years she'd saved every last penny from her work as a seamstress. 2 years she'd dreamed of the small house they would build right here, on the edge of her father's land. She wouldn't, Faith whispered to the silent, dusty air. She couldn't. But Vivian always had. Her sister, younger by just 20 months, had a knack for taking things that weren't hers. A doll when they were children, their mother's favorite silver brooch. Even their father's attention, which Vivian could steal with a well-timed smile or a perfectly feigned tear. But Elijah, this was different. This was war. Her eyes drifted to the corner of her bedroom. The wedding dress hung there, a ghost in the dim light. She had sewn it herself, every single stitch a prayer for her future. Cold winter nights had flown by, warmed by the thought of the spring wedding, of Elijah's hand in hers. Now, each stitch felt like a thorn. Hoofbeats pounded outside, a frantic rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The front door burst open. Her father, Thomas Garrett, stood there, his face a mask of thunderous concern. "Faith, Miller from the general store just told me. Is it true?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his rancher's strength wrapping around her as he pulled her into a hug. "That coward," he growled into her hair. "I never trusted that boy. Never." "It wasn't just him, Pa," Faith said, her voice surprisingly steady, hard as prairie stone. "It was Vivian." She pulled back, her eyes dry. She knew how much I loved him." Thomas paced the worn floorboards, his boots thudding a rhythm of fury. "Your sister, she was always impulsive, wild. But this?" He shook his head, looking older than his years. "I should have seen it, the way she'd look at him when she thought no one was watching." Faith walked to the window. The vast Nebraska prairie rolled out before her, an endless sea of grass that had once felt like promise. Now it felt like a cage. Everyone in town would know. The whispers would follow her down the street. The pity in their eyes would be worse than any insult. She would be poor Faith Garrett, the woman whose own sister stole her groom right from the altar. The thought was unbearable. "I can't stay here," she announced, her voice ringing with sudden, unshakable certainty. Her father stopped pacing. "Faith, this is your home." "And now it's a monument to everything I've lost," she shot back, gesturing at the walls that held 1,000 memories of her and Vivian, of a life that was now a lie. "Every corner of this house, every face in town, will just be a reminder." "So you'll run? Where would you even go?" Her mind, frantic for an escape, landed on an anchor. Aunt Matilda, her mother's sister, a widow who had moved out to Wyoming Territory a few years back. Her letters spoke of a booming little town called Sweetwater, a town that needed good women, skilled seamstresses, a town where nobody knew her name. "I'll go to Aunt Matilda's," she said, the plan solidifying as she spoke the words aloud. "She's asked me to visit. I can work there. I can start over." "And that will heal you?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with worry. "Running away won't mend a broken heart." "Maybe not," Faith admitted, turning to face him, her jaw set with the same stubbornness he saw in his late wife. But staying here will grind it into dust. He saw it then, the Garrett fire in her eyes. There would be no changing her mind. "You'll need money," he said, his tone shifting from argument to acceptance. "I have my savings," she replied, the words dripping with bitterness. "I was saving for a wedding, remember?" 3 days later, she stood on the train platform. A single trunk held her life: clothes, her precious sewing supplies, a few books, and tucked at the very bottom, a cream-colored ghost she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. Her father pressed a heavy leather pouch into her hand. "Extra. Don't you argue." Tears she hadn't shed for Elijah finally came. "I love you, Pa. I love you too, my brave girl," he whispered, his voice thick. He hesitated. "Your sister, don't let her—" "I can't talk about her," Faith cut him off. "Not yet." The train whistle shrieked. A final, quick kiss on his weathered cheek, and she was climbing aboard. She found a seat by a grimy window and didn't look back. The train rattled on, carrying her away from the flat plains of her past and toward the jagged, unknown mountains of her future. The journey was long. Days blurred into a haze of coal smoke and swaying carriages. Faith stared out the window, watching the world she knew dissolve behind her. Nebraska's gentle hills gave way to Wyoming's rugged, unforgiving beauty. By the time she reached the station nearest Sweetwater, she was bone-tired, but a hard kernel of determination had formed in her soul. A rattling stagecoach took her the rest of the way. Sweetwater wasn't the sleepy little outpost she'd imagined. It was a chaotic, thriving hub of noise and energy. A wide main street was flanked by a general store, a noisy saloon, a hotel, and a dozen other businesses, all buzzing with miners, ranchers, and families seeking their fortune. It was a town on the edge of the world, a place where pasts could be buried. Aunt Matilda's house was a small, neat cottage on the edge of the chaos, a tiny island of calm. Her aunt, a tall, wiry woman with kind eyes and the same stubborn chin as Faith's mother, was rushing out to meet her before the coach had even fully stopped. "Faith, my dear girl, you're the spitting image of your mother," Matilda cried, wrapping her in a fierce hug. The embrace felt like the first real warmth Faith had known in weeks. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and baking bread. It was safe. Matilda fussed over her, pouring tea, settling her into a worn armchair. "Now," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "your father's letter told me the basics, but I want to hear it from you." Faith's hands trembled as she set down the teacup. "Vivian married my fiancé," she said, the words stark and ugly in the cozy room. "3 days before our wedding." Matilda's eyes widened, a flash of anger in their depths. "Oh, Faith!" "I couldn't stay," Faith rushed on, the words tumbling out. "I couldn't stand the pity, the whispers. I couldn't stand wondering if they were all laughing at me, the fool who didn't see what was happening right under her nose." "No one would laugh at such cruelty," Matilda said fiercely. "Maybe not," Faith replied. "But I couldn't take the chance. I needed a place where I wasn't. Her, the woman who got left behind." "Then you've come to the right place," Matilda promised, her hand covering Faith's. "This town is growing so fast, nobody has time to worry about anyone else's past. The mine up north is booming, and they say the railroad is coming through next year. This is a place for new beginnings." "You said in your letter they needed seamstresses," Matilda beamed. "Desperately. Mrs. Peterson at the dress shop is turning away customers. She's a good woman, but she can't keep up. With your talent, Faith, your timing is a gift from Providence." For the first time since she'd crumpled that telegram, a tiny sliver of hope pushed through the anger and the grief. Maybe this was it. Maybe Sweetwater was where she could finally stitch her own life back together. The very next morning, Matilda marched her down to Mrs. Peterson's dress shop. The owner was a plump, rosy-cheeked woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. She took one look at the fine, precise stitching on Faith's traveling dress, and her face lit up. "You did this yourself?" Mrs. Peterson asked, running a reverent finger along a seam. "Yes, ma'am." "Can you start tomorrow?" Faith blinked, surprised by the speed of it all. "Yes, I'd be delighted." "Wonderful. The town social is next month, and I've got a list of orders as long as my arm." As they left, a sense of purpose began to settle in Faith's weary bones. "Let's stop by the general store," Matilda said, linking her arm through Faith's. "Time you met some folks." The store was the heart of the town, a cavern of organized clutter smelling of coffee, leather, and sawdust. Behind the long wooden counter stood a tall man with broad shoulders and light brown hair. He was listening intently to a customer, a serious expression on his face. "That's Kurt Irwin," Matilda whispered. "Owns the place. A good man. Quiet. Came from back east a couple of years ago." Faith barely registered the words. The last thing on her mind was a man. Any man. But then he looked up. As they approached the counter, his eyes met hers. They were a startling shade of green, like a forest after a rainstorm. His expression was polite, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze as it settled on her. "Mrs. Jenkins," he greeted Matilda, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. A warm smile transformed his serious face. "Kurt, I'd like you to meet my niece, Faith Garrett," Matilda announced proudly. "She's come all the way from Nebraska to stay with me." He extended a hand over the counter. "Welcome to Sweetwater, Miss Garrett." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused, but his touch gentle. "Any niece of Mrs. Jenkins is a welcome addition to our town." "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," Faith replied, her voice more formal than she intended. "He's being modest," Matilda cut in. "He's one of our most respected men. Built this store up from almost nothing." Kurt let out a soft laugh. "Mrs. Jenkins enjoys her exaggerations. Now what can I get for you, ladies?" While Matilda gave her order, Faith wandered the aisles. She stopped by a display of new fabrics, her fingers instinctively reaching out to feel the texture of a bolt of deep blue cotton. "That just came in on the morning stage," a voice said right beside her. She jumped, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. Kurt Irwin stood there, a small smile playing on his lips. "It would suit you," he said, his green eyes assessing her. "Brings out the blue in your own." A blush crept up her neck. I wasn't planning on making anything for myself." "A shame," he replied smoothly. "Mrs. Peterson was just in here this morning. She mentioned you'd be starting with her. I expect you'll be the talk of the town soon enough." "Word travels fast in Sweetwater." "In a town this size," he admitted, his smile fading into something more serious. "It's hard to keep secrets, though most of us have learned it's better not to pry." His eyes held hers for a moment too long, and she wondered. Did he know? Did he see the shadow of her past hanging over her? But his expression gave nothing away. It was just kind. And that, she realized, was more unsettling than anything else. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Work, home, church on Sundays. The town slowly became familiar. The faces on the street began to nod in greeting. Faith poured all her energy, all her pain, into her sewing. She stitched elegant gowns and simple work dresses, her needle flying, her mind blessedly blank. She saw Kurt Irwin, of course. A polite hello on the boardwalk. A brief chat at his store when she went for supplies. He was always friendly, always respectful. He'd ask about a book she was reading, or share a piece of news from the Eastern papers. And against all her better judgment, Faith started to look forward to those small moments. One afternoon, leaving the shop, She nearly ran into a ranch hand hurrying down the street. "Pardon me, miss," he said, grabbing her arm to steady her. He recognized her. "You're Miss Garrett, the new seamstress, right?" She nodded. "Good. I was just headed to the general store. Mr. Irwin asked me to give you a message if I saw you. Said to tell you those special threads you ordered from Chicago just came in." The threads were for a wedding dress, a particularly lavish one for the banker's daughter. The irony was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. She was the jilted bride who now spent her days creating symbols of other women's happiness. She changed course and headed for the store. The bell above the door jingled, and Kurt looked up from where he was helping an elderly couple. His face brightened when he saw her, a genuine, unguarded smile that made her stomach do a little flip. A few minutes later, he approached her, a small paper-wrapped package in his hand. "Your threads, Miss Garrett. I was going to bring them by after I closed up." He handed her the package. "I took the liberty of checking. They're all here." "That's very thoughtful, thank you." He hesitated, a rare hint of nervousness in his steady demeanor. "Miss Garrett, Faith, I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you to the town social next weekend." He rushed the next words out. "As friends, of course, just as friends." The invitation caught her completely off guard. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I don't think I'm ready for socials, Mr. Irwin." The words came out cold, clipped. His smile vanished, replaced by an expression of quiet understanding. "Of course, my apologies. I shouldn't have been so forward." The bell jingled again. New customers. "Thank you for the threats," she said quickly, turning to flee before he could say anything more. She walked home in a daze. His disappointed face burned into her mind. Why had she been so harsh? He was just being kind. But kindness was a complication she couldn't afford. It had been barely 2 months since her world had ended. It was too soon. It had to be. That evening, her aunt was waiting for her. "Kurt Irwin stopped by," Matilda said casually, not looking up from the potatoes she was peeling. Faith froze. "He did? Why?" "He wanted to apologize. Said he was worried he'd made you uncomfortable. He wanted me to know his intentions were purely honorable. Just 2 folks, new to town, enjoying a community event together." Faith stared at the wall, her mind a whirlwind. Matilda put down her knife. "Faith, what happened with Elijah and your sister was a monstrous thing, but you cannot let their poison ruin the rest of your life. It's only been 2 months. And in those 2 months, you have built a life here from nothing," Matilda said, her voice fierce. "You are respected, you are strong, you are healing, but you can't heal if you lock the door and throw away the key." She paused, her eyes softening. "Kurt Irwin is not Elijah Warren. Going to a party is not a proposal of marriage." A small, reluctant smile touched Faith's lips. "You're right, as usual." The next morning, she walked into the general store with her heart in her throat. Kurt was unpacking a crate, his back to her. "Mr. Irwin." He turned, his expression guarded. "Miss Garrett." "I came to apologize," she said, forcing the words out. "I was abrupt yesterday. You were kind to ask, and I was rude." "No apology needed," he said, though the tension in his shoulders remained. She took a deep breath. "The thing is, I've reconsidered. If your offer to escort me to the social still stands, as friends, I would like to accept." Slowly, the guarded look on his face melted away, replaced by that same warm, genuine smile that always seemed to reach his startling green eyes. "The offer absolutely still stands, Miss Garrett. I would be honored." The night of the social was cool and clear, the sky littered with stars. Faith wore a new dress, the same deep blue as the bolt of cotton Kurt had pointed out weeks ago. As she pinned up her hair, she felt a nervous flutter she hadn't felt in years. Kurt arrived looking impossibly handsome in a crisp shirt and dark vest. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Faith," he breathed, "you look beautiful." The town hall was alive with music and laughter. Almost everyone from Sweetwater was there. Kurt was a perfect gentleman, introducing her to people, keeping her punch glass full, making her feel at ease. They danced a lively reel that left her breathless and laughing, then a slow waltz. As he held her, his hand warm on the small of her back, he leaned in. "Are you glad you came?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I am," she admitted, surprised by the truth of it. "More than I expected." "Good," he said. His expression turned serious. "I'm glad you're here, Faith. In Sweetwater, I mean. I hope you're planning on staying." Before she could answer, the music ended, and they were swept apart by the crowd. But his words, and the look in his eyes when he'd said them, stayed with her. It was more than friendship. She could feel it. And the terrifying part was, she thought she might be feeling it too. Their friendship deepened into something more. He'd walk her home from the shop. They'd sit on Matilda's porch and talk for hours, sharing stories of their pasts. She learned about the fire in Boston that had taken his parents and his home, the tragedy that had sent him west in search of a new start, just like her. "I never thought I'd run a general store in Wyoming," he told her one evening, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. "But it feels right. It feels like home." "Sometimes the path we don't choose," she replied softly, "is the one we were meant for all along." He turned to her then, his green eyes intense. "Faith, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. "My name isn't really Kurt Irwin." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The peaceful porch, the setting sun, all of it swam before her eyes. "What?" she whispered. "My real name is Curtis Irvington. The Irwins were business rivals of my family back in Boston. Powerful people. The fire that killed my parents. It wasn't an accident, Faith." She could only stare at him, her mind reeling. "The Irwins wanted my father's shipping contracts. They tried to buy him out. He refused, so they burned us out. I was the only one who survived. I came west to disappear, to start over where no one could find me." He took her hand, his grip tight, desperate. "I lied because I was afraid. But I'm more afraid of losing you. You had to know the truth." Betrayal. The word screamed in her mind. He had built their entire friendship, this budding something, on a foundation of lies. He was no different from Elijah. "I have to go," she stammered, pulling her hand away and stumbling back into the house, leaving him alone in the twilight. For 2 days, she avoided him. She sent Matilda to the store for supplies. She took the long way home from the shop. Her heart was a battlefield of anger and a strange, aching disappointment. She had started to trust him. She had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, happiness was possible again. On the 3rd day, there was a knock at the door. It was him. "Faith, please," he said, standing on the porch, looking haggard. "Just let me explain." "You lied to me," she said, her voice flat. "I did," he admitted, "and it was wrong, but my feelings for you were never a lie. They are the truest thing in my life." He took a step closer. "The man who owns the mine north of town. His name is Silas Irwin. He's the one who ordered the fire. I didn't know he was here until a month ago. I've been trying to find a way to expose him, to get justice for my parents." The story was so fantastic, so unbelievable, it had to be true. "Why tell me now?" "Because he's seen us together," Kurt said, his voice dropping low. "And he knows who you are. He knows you're alone here, save for your aunt. He thinks you're my weakness. And Faith, he's right. A cold dread washed over her. She wasn't just in a town of new beginnings. She had stumbled into a town of dangerous secrets. Her own heartbreak suddenly seemed small, insignificant. This wasn't just about a stolen fiancé anymore. This was about life and death. And then, as if things couldn't possibly get any more complicated, the bell on the dress shop door jingled one crisp October afternoon. Faith looked up, expecting a customer, and her blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway, looking thin and haunted, was her sister, Vivian. "Faith," Vivian whispered, her eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with their family drama. "You have to listen to me. We were wrong. All of it. It was a lie." "What are you talking about?" Faith asked, her hands trembling. "Elijah," Vivian said, her voice cracking. "He didn't run off with me because he loved me. He ran off with me because he had to. He stole money, Faith, a lot of money, from some very dangerous men back east." Faith's mind flashed to Kurt, to the fire, to the Irwins. "What men?" she breathed. "I don't know their names," Vivian sobbed. "Elijah said they were ruthless. He said they'd stop at nothing to get their money back. He staged the whole thing, marrying me, breaking your heart. He thought if you hated him, you'd leave. You'd go somewhere they couldn't find you. He was trying to protect you." The room spun. Every bit of righteous anger, every ounce of pain she had nurtured for months, it all dissolved into a confusing, terrifying mess. Her betrayal hadn't been a betrayal at all. It had been a desperate, twisted act of protection. "Where is he now?" Faith asked. "He's gone," Vivian cried. "He heard those men were getting close, so he ran. He sent me here. He told me to find you, to warn you. He said they might come for you, thinking you know where he, or the money, is." At that exact moment, the bell on the door jingled again. Two men stood there. They were dressed in expensive city suits that looked out of place in dusty Sweetwater. They were not smiling. One of them looked from Vivian's terrified face to Faith's. "Faith Garrett?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk and cold as a grave. "We have some questions for you, about an old friend of yours, a man named Elijah Warren." The trap had sprung. She had run from one heartbreak straight into the jaws of something far, far worse. The two men stepped into the shop, their presence sucking all the air from the small room. The shorter one, with a face like a bulldog, closed the door behind them, the little bell giving a final, mournful jingle. The taller one, the one who had spoken, smiled, but it was a predator's smile. It didn't touch his dead gray eyes. "We don't want any trouble, Miss Garrett," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "We're just associates of a Mr. Silas Irwin. I believe you've made the acquaintance of his nephew." He let the word hang in the air, a clear, sharp threat. Faith's mind was racing. Irwin, Kurt had told her. The man who owned the mine, the man who had murdered his family, and Elijah had stolen from them. Everything was connected, a tangled, deadly web, and she was caught right in the center. "I don't know any Mr. Irwin," Faith said, her voice shaking but firm. Beside her, Vivian was as pale as a ghost, barely breathing. "Oh, I think you do," the man purred. "A tall fellow, runs the general store, calls himself Kurt Irwin." He took a step closer, his eyes flicking around the shop, at the colorful fabrics and half-finished dresses. "You see, Elijah Warren was a clerk for our organization back in Boston, a very clever boy with numbers. So clever, he managed to make a significant amount of our employer's money disappear." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We have reason to believe he didn't act alone. We believe he had help from another clever young man, a man named Curtis Irvington, a man whose family had a disagreement with Mr. Irwin in the past." Faith's blood ran cold. They thought Kurt and Elijah were partners. "You're mistaken," Faith said. "Mr. Irwin, Curtis, he hates the Irwins. They killed his family." The man finished for her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Yes, a tragic accident. Fires are so unpredictable." He leaned against a cutting table, looking perfectly at ease. "Here's our problem, Miss Garrett. Elijah is gone. The money is gone. But you are here, and his little sister-in-law just showed up, looking panicked. And you are very, very close to Mr. Irvington. It all looks cozy." "What do you want?" Faith demanded. "We want the money, or we want Elijah, or we want Curtis Irvington. Frankly, we're not picky. You're going to help us get one of them. You're going to send a message to your friend at the general store. You're going to tell him to meet you at the old abandoned mineshaft at dusk. Alone. Tell him you've found something of Elijah's. Something important. And if I don't?" The man's smile widened. He looked over at Vivian, who flinched as if he'd struck her. "Your sister is looking awfully fragile. It would be a shame if she had an accident. This is a rough town, after all." There was no choice. Her own safety was one thing, but Vivian's, she couldn't. She nodded numbly. "All right. Excellent." The man straightened up. "My associate, Mr. Jones, will stay here with your sister, just to ensure you don't get lost on your way to the general store." Faith walked out of the shop, the world feeling unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She could feel the bulldog-faced Mr. Jones watching her from the doorway. Every step toward the general store felt like a step toward a hangman's noose. She was leading Kurt into a trap. She entered the store, the bell sounding like a death knell. Kurt was behind the counter. His face lit up when he saw her, then immediately fell as he took in her pale, terrified expression. "Faith? What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, coming around the counter. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Irwin's men. They're at the shop. They have Vivian." His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "What do they want?" she told him. "The message. The meeting at the mine shaft. The trap." "You can't go," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "They'll kill you." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face, his green eyes blazing with an intensity she'd never seen before. "They have Vivian, Faith, and they're using her to get to me, and you. I have to go. It's a trap." "I know," he said grimly, "which is why I'm not going alone." He looked past her, toward the back room of the store. "Sheriff," he called out. Sheriff Miller, a grizzled man with a drooping mustache, emerged from the back room, a half-eaten apple in his hand. He'd been playing checkers with Kurt, a daily ritual. "What's the trouble, Kurt?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he saw Faith's face. Quickly, Kurt explained everything. The men, Vivian, the mine shaft. The sheriff listened, his expression growing more and more serious. When Kurt was done, he tossed his apple core into a wastebasket. "Silas Irwin has been a thorn in my side since he got here," he said, his voice a low growl. "He acts like he owns this town. I've been looking for a reason to run him out. Looks like he just handed it to me." He looked at Faith. "You did the right thing coming here, Missy. Now here's what we're going to do." The plan was simple and terrifying. Faith would go back to the dress shop and tell Mr. Jones that Kurt had agreed to the meeting. Sheriff Miller would gather a few deputies he could trust. They would head to the mine shaft early, find cover, and wait. Kurt would go to the meeting as planned, but he wouldn't be alone. Walking back to the shop was the hardest thing Faith had ever done. Mr. Jones was still there, leaning against the doorframe, looking bored. "He agreed," Jones grunted. "Yes," Faith said, her heart pounding. "He'll be there at dusk, alone." Jones just nodded, then went back inside to stand guard over Vivian. The hours until dusk dragged by, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against Faith's nerves. She and Vivian sat in silence, the unspoken fear a living thing in the room between them. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and violet, the tall man returned. "Time to go," he said. He grabbed Vivian by the arm. "You're coming with us. A little insurance." Faith's stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the plan. "No, you said, I say what happens now," he snarled. "You're coming too, Miss Garrett. We'll have a nice little reunion. You, your sister, and your beau." They were marched out the back of the shop and up the dusty path that led out of town toward the old abandoned mine. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, sounding like a warning. When they reached the mine, the entrance was a dark, gaping mouth in the hillside. The tall man pushed Vivian toward it. "Wait inside," he commanded. He and Jones took up positions behind a pile of rubble, their pistols drawn. Faith stood out in the open, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was the bait. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then a figure appeared, walking steadily up the path. It was Kurt. He was alone. "Irvington," the tall man called out. "Glad you could make it. Did you bring what we're looking for?" "I don't have your money," Kurt said, his voice calm and even. He stopped about 20 feet away. "Let the women go. This is between you and me." "I don't think so," the man chuckled. "You see, this is much more satisfying, taking out the last of the Irvingtons and cleaning up Elijah's mess all at once." He raised his pistol, aiming it directly at Kurt's chest. "Any last words?" And that's when it happened. "Drop it, Irwin!" Sheriff Miller's voice boomed from the rocks above them. "You're surrounded!" The tall man's head whipped around, his eyes wide with shock. For a split second, he was distracted. And in that split second, Kurt moved. He dove to the side as the man's pistol fired, the shot echoing through the twilight. From the shadows, the deputies opened fire. Mr. Jones grunted and fell, clutching his shoulder. The tall man, realizing he was caught, did the unthinkable. He lunged for Faith, grabbing her and pulling her in front of him as a shield, the cold barrel of his gun pressed against her temple. "Everybody back off, or she dies!" he screamed, his voice raw with panic. "I'll kill her, I swear it!" Kurt froze, his face a mask of horror. The sheriff and his men held their fire. "Let her go!" Kurt yelled. "Not a chance," the man spat, dragging Faith backward toward the mine entrance. "We're leaving, and she's our ticket out." Faith's mind was a blur of terror. This was it. This was how it ended. But then, from the darkness of the mine shaft behind them, a voice spoke. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Everyone turned. A figure stepped out of the shadows. He was gaunt, his clothes were ragged, but his eyes burned with a desperate fire. It was Elijah Warren, and he was holding a lit stick of dynamite. The man holding Faith stared, his jaw slack with disbelief. "Warren, you're supposed to be in Mexico." "Plans change," Elijah said, his voice raspy. He held up the stick of dynamite, the fuse sizzling, spitting sparks in the growing darkness. "I heard you were in town. I couldn't let you get to her." His eyes flicked to Faith, and in them she saw a universe of regret. "I'm sorry, Faith, for everything." Then he looked back at her captor. "Now, you have a choice. You can let her go, or we can all go." The man was sweating, his eyes darting between Elijah's face and the burning fuse. He was trapped. "This ain't over, Warren," he snarled, and then he shoved Faith forward, hard. She stumbled and fell to her knees. Kurt was there in an instant, pulling her behind him as Sheriff Miller and his deputies swarmed forward, tackling the man to the ground. Elijah didn't move. He just stood there, holding the hissing dynamite. "Kurt," he yelled, "the money, it's in the mine. It was always for her, to give her a new start." Then he turned and ran back into the blackness of the mine. "Elijah, no!" Faith screamed. A moment later, a deafening explosion ripped through the hillside. The ground shook, and the entrance to the mine collapsed in a cloud of dust and rock. Silence descended. A heavy, final silence. Elijah was gone. He had chosen his own justice. In the aftermath, the story came out. Sheriff Miller found the stolen money in a dusty old crate just inside the mine, right where Elijah had left it. It was returned to Silas Irwin, who, faced with multiple witnesses to his hired gun's attempted murders, was promptly arrested and run out of the territory. His mine was taken over by the town. Vivian, shaken but safe, decided to stay in Sweetwater. She and Faith began the slow, difficult process of rebuilding their sisterhood, a bond forged anew in shared trauma and forgiveness. And Faith was finally free. One evening, months later, she and Kurt stood on the porch of the general store, which was now also their home. The town of Sweetwater was quiet, the stars bright in the Wyoming sky. "He saved my life," Faith said softly, thinking of Elijah. "In the end, he did the right thing." "He did," Kurt agreed, pulling her close. His arms were strong and steady around her. "He loved you, in his own broken way." "But it wasn't a love like this," she whispered, looking up at him, at his kind face and the honest love in his green eyes. "The past was a landscape of ghosts and regrets, but the future was him." He leaned down and kissed her, a long, slow kiss full of promise and a life rebuilt from ashes. "I love you, Faith Garrett," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, Curtis Irvington," she replied, finally able to say his real name without a trace of fear or betrayal. The pain of her past hadn't just been a wound, it had been a map, a twisted, painful map that had, against all odds, led her exactly where she was meant to be. It had led her home. What do you think? Was Elijah a villain or a hero in the end? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of love, betrayal, and frontier justice, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West.